much for joining me today. Like, I really appreciate it. Like, I know life is busy and just taking time out of your day. Like, yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. I'm happy to be here.
So, can you tell me a little bit more about yourself and just kind of like what you do, just a little bit about your background?
You bet. Absolutely. So, my name is Amy Stone. I'm a life coach. I work with adults in blended families. And what that means to me is that a blended family is one where at least one of the adults in the relationship has a previous relationship where there are children. So, these are stepmoms and stepdads primarily. But I say the words adult with blended family because a lot of times that label of stepmom may not exactly fit what is going on in our mind. So I work with girlfriends, I work with people who may not ever get married, whatever the situation is. But combining those two families, joining a blended family or combining two families is it's a complicated structure. And so there are things that I can really help with. And I come to that as a life coach. The reason I feel so called to this is, as many people would guess, this is partly my lived experience. I got married when I got married to my husband. He had been married before, married and divorced, and he already had kids. So I was a stepmom before I was a mom. And so this was my lived experience. Those kids who were young when we met and started dating are now are grown, independent adults, grown and flown. We had some more kids. So I have that experience of being a stepmom without any kids and then blending the families and some of the challenges that people go through. So when I became a coach, I felt very drawn to that being the group of people that I really hope to help.
That's awesome. And I really like the way that you kind of described it because I feel like you're right. Like a lot of people, when they think blended families, they do think like, oh, the stepmom, like probably like a married couple or whatever.
Yeah.
And so it is interesting because it can be just like, well, I don't want to say just, but it could be a girlfriend, boyfriend situation for sure. And I think that's why I was drawn to you is because I have also had my own experience with a blended family, not only like in my current relationship, but then I also feel like with growing up, like with my mom and stuff too. Because
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah, and that's a dynamic that I'm doing a lot of thinking about right now. Actually, people are beginning to talk to me about that, having grown up in what would be a blended family. One of the reasons that I was probably really comfortable marrying someone who had been divorced is that my parents were divorced. So my parents, I didn't have step parents growing up because my parents, neither one of them remarried because each of them had been married before. So they were their own second marriages. I get these things get complicated, right? So it's nice to have somebody to connect with and share with who doesn't have who it just is in the role of just like writing it down and accepting it and not swearing off, like just not running away because it's complicated, not looking for, if that makes any sense.
yeah, definitely. It does make a lot of sense. And I was reading some of your blogs on your
Yay.
website, which are actually, they were very good because I could definitely like identify with a lot of the stuff that you talked about. And so like even now, um, just like a super quick background, like I'm in a relationship, we're not married. I'm the one that has the 5-year-old. And so I think we're we're similar, but then we're also like different because in this situation, like I'm the parent with the child, right? And then
Yes.
I'm the person with the boyfriend and he's going through everything and so yeah, like I was reading some of your blogs and they were very interesting. One of the ones that I really remember and that stood out to me was the one where you talk about can you love your child, your stepchild as much as your biological child or something like that. I
Yes.
remember. And that was just very interesting to me because I feel like I've kind of done that maybe like not in a like malicious type of way,
Sure.
but like I'm guilty of that, like kind of just blurting out like, oh, like if when you have your own children, like you'll like that type of thing.
Yeah.
So can you
And
talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because this is a thing. It's so interesting because I think that this goes way beyond blended family and into just how we as parents and adults deal with the kids that we are caretakers for and other people that work with them, right? So there is a situation that sometimes happens in a step family, a blended family dynamic, where one adult would say to the other, "You don't understand because you're not the biological parent." Or a friend or another step parent may advise you and say, "You'll never love your stepkids like you love your own." Or a parent would say to their partner, "I want you to love this kid like it's their own child." And that's an incredible burden to put on somebody, right? On the flip side, it is absolutely the way every adult feels about their biological children, not just with the people who are in their house, but if when I drop my kids off at school, I want those people to take care of them as if they were their own, right? And so it's all true, right? It's all true. So the pressure to love somebody like they're your own is impossible if you don't know what it is like to love a biological child. So if you had said that to me before I had kids, I would be like, yeah, sure, absolutely. That's how I feel. You got it, no problem, right? And then, but the relationship that I have with my stepkids who are grown and flown, and they're adults, I mean, it's absolutely different. The relationship that I have with each of these four kids, there's four kids going through our house. They're different from person to person because they're different people. And my stepkids do have this changes from family to family, right? So that's one of the things that's so wonderful about blended families. No two are alike. You've got one child, you're dating a man who has no children,
No children, yeah.
no children. So that's your dynamic, right? And is the father of your child in their life?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, and that's not always the case, right? So when you have an engaged parent, when you have two engaged parents, the job of the step parent or the boyfriend, girlfriend, or the bonus parent, or whatever you want to call it, the job of that additional adult is different than if that person does not have an active parent, right? So there's a bunch of different ways this can show up. And so I think that sentence can put a lot of pressure on people for one, if they don't know, or two, if they begin to feel like their relationship is less than, right? So my relationship with my stepkids is that they have two active parents, right? And I care for both of them deeply. If when they were little, had I been the adult around and a bus came careening down the street, I would have jumped in front of that bus, right? Because I was the adult that was present. But the reality is that most of the time, that wasn't my lived experience. There were two other adults who were very much involved. And so in that situation, I really feel like it's okay to be a little bit more distant and be like, yeah, no, absolutely. I love this person as the adult, the other adult in this family, very, very much, whatever that looks like, and honor it. And also honor that the biological parent has a deep, central, primal hope that not just the person they're sharing their house with, everybody on the planet should love that kid as much as they do, right? Like, think about how much it hurts when somebody is not kind to our kids. That's what we make jokes about it. Like, it brings out the mama bear and you need to calm down, mama bear, and the tiger, all of those things, right? We have a very, very instinctual response to like, protect my kid. They're both right. They're both right. And it's so, I guess what I would say, let's think about this. This is actually a good question. What should we say instead? Like, what do we want to say instead? And how do we want to act instead of saying, hey, you don't love my kid as much as you as you love your biological kid? Probably, because I really feel like you can care for and commit to the care of that child no matter what, right? Even if actually you don't like them. Right. Like, so if you have a kid who is in your family who you don't know very well, or they're resistant to you being in the life, or maybe, because some kids are just, they have behavior disorders or whatever might be happening. There's something going on that you're just not a huge fan. Right. If you're committed to the family and you're committed to the relationship, you can be committed to the care of that kid and being a part of their life, sort of removing the pressure of that love, if that makes any sense. Like, I'm always going to pay your bills. I'm always going to create a home for you. I'm going to be polite and kind and supportive and help you get to where you want to go. I just may not ever, I just, I think you can take that. The word love sometimes has the weighted implication, is my thinking.
Yeah, that's true because everyone shows love differently. And so
Yes.
yeah, for sure. I think for me, just really quick, I know that he loves my daughter, and I feel like a lot of the times it could just be like a reactive, like just you see something you don't like, right? Like you
Yes.
said, and
So
it's
what
like
is
just a quick,
yeah. What does he
yeah.
do that sets you off that you're like, nah, if you had kids, you'd do this differently?
I think it's a lot with like parenting styles. So my background is I'm a clinician. I'm a mental in the mental health field. And so to me, like I'm very gentle with my daughter. And so even if she's throwing a tantrum, like I want to figure out, I want to acknowledge how her emotion and I want to get to the bottom of like, oh, what's going on? Like that is causing this tantrum. Cause that's just like me, I guess, in my background. And my partner is more, he's a little more like, I guess, tough
He wants the
parenting
well,
type
he
of
wants the
thing.
tantrum to probably stop.
Yes, for sure.
Okay, yeah. She's 5, right?
Yeah.
All right. So I have a confession to make about myself as a step parent, which I'll lead this with because I think it's
Mhm.
significant, right? Because he doesn't have any kids.
Mhm.
I did not know as much as I would have if like I just didn't know when I was a step parent a lot of the stages of development that I then learned when I was a parent several years later and watching these little people grow in, right? So 5-year-olds, newsflash, they have tantrums. And also they don't have any skills yet. They don't have any skills to regulate themselves out of it. And I did not know that as a new step parent. And so my expectations of what was normal behavior for my stepkids when I came into the scene was, I have to admit, just wrong in a lot of ways. And so there were several times I can look back and see that it was my non-understanding that caused my struggle and my unhappiness. So that I think I think it may definitely be a difference in parenting styles. That's the number one thing that people come for assistance in blended families. But there also may be that he doesn't know. And the
Yeah.
thing that makes that so hard is that you don't know what you don't know, right? So
Yeah.
he has no way to, and I mean, I don't know your boyfriend, but when people try and tell me that I don't know stuff and that's why I'm reacting, I don't take it very well. Right. So it wouldn't have been very, if I should do that, I should think back and see whether or not I remember my boyfriend and my husband saying, oh, you just don't know this yet. But, things like I really thought that my stepkids should have done a better job of eating when we were in restaurants. Oh gosh, and then
Yeah.
later when I had my kids that age that were 4, I was like, listen, we're not going to restaurants because this is not any fun for anybody. I just didn't know. And I do remember the tantrums. So like all the things that you learn as your kid goes from 0 to 5, and you have like that on super skills because you have a therapeutic background, right? So the academic knowledge to slow it down and lead her through and check in with her and set up security and safety, all that stuff. You're like an expert, right? But your boyfriend is
Yeah.
like, please stop screaming and, make it stop, make it
Yes.
stop. So, so yeah, is that helpful?
Yeah. Yeah, it
Okay. Yeah.
is. Yeah. Um, yeah. So just moving on, there was also something else that I related to a lot. And,
I just
you
want to
know,
say,
uh-huh.
I'm so excited to talk to you about reading things on the blog because just like the podcast, right? I write it, I put it out there. It's so much fun to talk to somebody. It's like, oh my gosh, you're reading it. People are reading it. Oh,
Yes.
yes.
Yes, I read a few of them.
Hi.
Just another one that really stood out to me was you were talking about Mother's Day
Yes.
and how, I mean, I know that could be hard because I see it like in my own relationship now, like the biological parent is always going to want, their child
Yes.
on Mother's Day, Father's Day, or whatever. What was your experience with that? And how
So
did you navigate that?
I tell the story on the blog. So I have a complicated relationship with Mother's Day coming from when I was a kid. My mom, had just a mixed up relationship with my mom. She has a mental health condition. She wasn't always around. Right. And so I had my own weird thoughts about Mother's Day, which, just to make it extra fun, I've also laid out for any other holiday like Valentine's Day. I'm like,
Yeah.
you can't force me to declare my love on February 14th. I can declare my love any day. I just have this
Mhm.
really like knee jerk reaction to those holidays. And so, Mother's Day, it's like, all right, we're going to celebrate moms on just this day. Right. So, and the word mom is like love. We put a lot of stigma and a lot of attachment onto it. And so then it becomes very challenging. And I thought it was just me that had weird stuff about Mother's Day, but it turns out there's lots of people, right? There's just lots of people who have issues. And one of those groups is obviously people who are in a role of parenting or caregiving for children who they are not the biological parents, right? So, but this is a cute story from when I was dating my husband. So my husband is older than I am. And this was early in our relationship. I had no business giving any advice, information, feedback, anything, none. Right. So it depends. So when you go through a divorce, a lot of people have like a custody
Yeah.
arrangement, right? So there's instructions in the agreement for this is what we do and this is what we don't do. And there's a period of time where you're sort of managing getting used to the rules. And I didn't know this then, but I do know it now that that's a kind of a high conflict time because it takes sometimes a lot of time to get to that point where you have that agreement. So you can be very fixated on following the rules and making sure everybody follows the rules. All right. So anyway, I was sitting on my boyfriend's couch and he was talking. This is back in the 90s. So this was on an actual phone, not a cell phone, but he was
Mhm.
in the other room talking to his ex-wife. And the holiday was coming up for Mother's Day, and it would have fallen on the weekend where he would have had the kids for some portion of Mother's Day. So a lot of agreements do have it hard coded that Mother's Day is with the mom, Father's Day is with the dad, whatever. Anyway, he hangs up the phone. He mentions it to me, just blah, blah, blah. This is, whatever was in his mind. And I had no business getting involved. None. I was an annoying punk. I was the girlfriend. Like nobody even knew about me yet. I was like this. I had no standing in this conversation at all.
Yeah.
And I just super bossy. I was like, you should let her have them the whole weekend, like the whole weekend. He's like, but why? And he was like, just annoyed with me and, was like, you don't know what you're talking about and you have no business. And I was like, yeah, all of that is true. And still, you should let her have this if she wants it for the entire weekend. And he's like, why? Because it's Mother's Day. She wants it and she lives like a block away, right? There's no inconvenience, right? So I had no business getting involved, none. This and what I was proposing wouldn't work in a lot of families. It did in this family. But so then he called his wife back shortly later. He told me I didn't have any business being involved. He was right. But he called me back. He called his ex-wife back later and he's like, my girlfriend says you should have the kids. And off they went. And it was just like, all right, well, okay. So anyway, it turns out she really appreciated it.
Yeah.
And that set a precedent for in this parental swap that they were nice to each other on those holidays and giving, which doesn't always happen. But in this one, it did. And I always loved the fact that he threw me under the bus, like my girlfriend said this, but so that worked for us. I think that also the other thing in Mother's Day, it can be a very complicated holiday for people. And my survival tip for myself is I try not to make it too big of a thing, right? Like I try and make it very low key, pick some things that I like. Really, I make sure that I verbalize what I want to the people around me so
Mhm.
that people know, because I don't know about your boyfriend, but my husband is a really bad mind reader. So if I
For sure.
if I drop hints, I'm never getting what I want. I just have to come out and say, I want to do this, So
Yeah. Why can't they just read our minds? Like,
it
really?
would be nice. It would be nice. And the other thing is that girls are, it's a very gendered thing, but the females are often hyper tuned to try and interpret what other people are doing. So like we feel like we love it when other people do it. It's just hard to get. It's just hard to get other people to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that story because it kind of reminds me, like, co-parenting doesn't have to be hard. And
Right.
so, yeah, I feel
Yeah.
like a lot of people, um, just feel like, oh, this is the way things should be, or there's a lot of shoulds. And so
Yes. How do you feel about the shoulds? I know you're the interviewer, but I have my very strong
uh-huh.
thoughts about it. But when like I agree with you 100% that when we're holding on to that idea that there is some other version of this
Hmm.
that we're not achieving the should, right? And I think that comes up a lot in parenting and family
Hmm.
life and specifically blended family life. But as a someone who's a clinician who's got a therapeutic background, how do you feel about
I don't like it. I hate
it?
well, I don't like shoulds in general in life, but for me and my experience was just remembering that it's not about me, it's about my daughter. And so even if there was decisions that I had to make that maybe I was like, oh, like I wish I didn't have to do this, or like I'm like, oh, it's not about me, it's about her. And so I
Yeah.
think just reminding myself of that. And so even like at the beginning when I was going through my own custody,
Yeah.
court thing and figuring out schedules, I was just kind of like, well, I'm just going to do 50-50 custody. And so a lot of people were like, what? Like, why? Like you should fight for full custody. And I'm like, well, I don't really see, I mean, in my particular situation, I was like, I don't want to fight. Like, I just want
Yeah.
us to have, so that's a situation where I feel like there was like, oh, well, you should do this. And I'm like, no, like, you know,
So yeah, so your friends were saying you should push for more just because
mhm.
yeah. Yeah, I think I think that we see that a lot in families that people feel like that it's a competition.
Yeah.
And I also think that we compare ourselves and our families to a vision of a family that we think exists that isn't. So in a blended family, if you've got this comparison that, oh, it's easier in another formation of a family, that's a really destructive thought, right?
Mhm.
Because, first of all, it's not the family you have. So you're wishing for something you don't have, which is always tough. And second, it's probably not true. There's no there's no family that I've ever run into where these things are any easier. There's no family that I run into that doesn't have parenting struggles, so the fact, these things exist all over the place. And there's no family I've ever run into where the kids don't ever throw a tantrum or refuse to eat their vegetables, right? It's like
Yeah.
it's like, it's like, so we create this like perception of this thing that's out there that we're striving for, or that we're letting ourselves feel like we're not doing it right. And we can let it not be that. We can change that to, this is my family and I choose to love it.
Yeah, definitely. Um, how did you, what was your experience with the title like mom, or because I feel like that's also an issue that happens, in blended families, is like
Yes.
the calling of mom or dad step,
Yes.
because that's
Yeah.
kind of something that was an issue in my relationship too early on is, my daughter calls my boyfriend dad. And so her biological father had an issue with that,
Yeah.
to where he
Yeah.
would literally tell her, like, I'm your dad,
Right.
call him by his name, or, things like that.
Absolutely. So for the most part, 99.99% of the time, my stepkids called me by my name. They called me Amy.
Okay.
That's how they met me. They were the younger one who was little. And because I think that is significant, would trip up a little bit. And sometimes call me mom, but kids do that, right?
Yeah.
Kids do that. They will, if you've got the same color pants on and, like a 4-year-old will tug on and call you mom, it's like it's a placeholder name for that person. And there is an attachment to it. And so so there's layers of this, right? There's your daughter's experience, and she should get to choose to some degree what the names she uses are, right? And then there's her dad's
Mhm.
preference to have propriety over that name, which it's respectful to honor his desire, right? One of the things that I tell people who are struggling with this, having the word be used for more than one person, like, so the kid wants to call, mom, mama. Some kids will do like Mama Jane, Mama Amy, so on and so forth. And the biological parent can feel very much like it's lessening
Mhm.
their influence. Is that it's a word, right? So they're like, my name is Amy. There's millions of people named Amy in the world, right? And it makes it no less special to be standing next to somebody else with my name, that I am who I am. So for the person who's feeling that pain, who's feeling like it's a lessening of that, that's the reframe I would offer that person. I don't know that it necessarily works unless they're asking for it. So if, like, I don't know that would be a helpful conversation between you guys necessarily. But on the flip side, if you guys have conflict because her dad is feeling, frustration with this or sensitivity or whatever emotions he's got going on, and that's causing like conflict within the family, one thing you can do is choose another nickname, right? Like, so choose another term of affection that the child can adopt. And where we see this in families, in another place that it works really well, is with the nicknames that people give grandparents and great grandparents, right? So when a kid's got, a bunch of grandparents and they're all like around all the time, you would not, calling them all grandma can be confusing. So you'll assign them nicknames. Like, so one will be Nana and Mimi and, Pop Pop and all of those things. And you can do a similar thing with the other adults if it works and everybody embraces it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. That's kind of like what ended up happening is it kind of just so happened, like my daughter calls her biological daddy or dad, and
right.
then she'll call my boyfriend Papa.
Right.
And she has 3 grandmas. So she's like, when she talks about them, she's like grandma, other grandma,
yes,
mommy grandma. It's like,
exactly.
So yeah,
and that is what, no, exactly. And so, I do think that it's valid. Like, so you you kind of let the kids pick the names for grandparents, but they just sort of grow up in the family. And so it's a lot of things. It's honoring the emotions of the adult, and trying to accommodate it, and being a little bit like with all of these things, the emotions make it more complicated, right? Because it's hard to have the discussion when people have an emotion. It's not actually your job to regulate how her dad feels about the words, right? So you could take the position, it's like, well, whatever, she's going to say what she's going to say, but then you're stuck with all that conflict, right? So it's like making the decision. It's like, okay, it's not actually my thing, but if I want to have a smoother relationship, let's see if we can call you, Papa Joe or whatever it might be, so another place that you see this show up with kids and parents is there are some parents and step parents who will get is nicknames, right? So when you give a kid a nickname, sometimes they're very proprietary about, no, only this person is allowed to tell me this, is allowed to call me this. Like, that's mom's name for me, or that's Susie's name for me. She's the only one. If somebody else tries to use that nickname, the kid is like, excuse me. That's not your word. You don't get to say that, especially the ones from when they were little. So so my son's name is Jack, and the home helper we've had since he was a baby is the only person in the world who is allowed to call him Jacksito. Like, if somebody else, because he's almost 16, somebody else called him that, he would be enraged. Like, I'm not little anymore. The only person who's allowed to call him that is that one person.
Yeah, I've seen that even with adults too. Like, just names are very like personal and intimate.
And that's the number one thing that I run into with blended families is the distance makes it harder to keep in mind the emotions that the other people are experiencing, right? So it's helpful. And I'm going to guess you're probably actually very good at this, but it's like to take that second and be like, all right, so even though I no longer have a legal relationship with this parent, or they live in a different state or whatever, it's the emotion for them is there. And then to just be like, okay, the emotion is there. Like, can I honor the fact that this is really upsetting to them? And what can we do about it? Similarly to the way you probably do with your daughter when she's having a tantrum.
Yeah, definitely. And I was actually going to ask you that is like, what are some of the common issues that come up with in your work with blended families?
Absolutely. This is the top question I'm getting on interviews. I love this. I'm
Yay.
super prepared for this. Super, super prepared. Okay. So the top issue that people come to is the same as with families is money. That's the top
Okay.
conflict point in blended families. That should not be a surprise to anybody. It's the top conflict in any partnership, business, personal, friends, how are we going to split the check to how are we going to pay for all of these things? And money is a flashpoint in blended families because there's often people are paying for things in other houses and splitting of expenses. It can get complicated. So that's the top thing. The next one is the one that you brought up, which is the blending of parenting styles. And that shows up in a million different ways. It shows up between in the two houses, if a child is going back and forth. And it shows up in the new relationship where you've got two different, in a bunch of different ways. So if you've got a Brady Bunch situation where both people are coming together with kids, then it shows up like on steroids because the kids have a perception of the way it should be and the parents have been doing it their own way, and bringing all that together is like
Yeah.
that's a lot, right? And that folds out to you can imagine it just runs from everything from how long the shower should be to when should the kid tie their shoes to there's a thousand.
Yeah.
So that's a big one, right? Identity, which we touched on. What are you going to call me? What am I like? What does respect look like in our house? Like, what do I get to do as a parent? What authority do I have? Control, right? The control is a huge thing. Perception of control, having control over your own schedule and your own life. And so those are the big ones. Those are the big ones.
Yeah, definitely. I see. Yeah, I had my own experience with all of those. So I see how they could be the most common challenges for sure. Is there anything that you would do differently just looking back now
Oh yeah,
from
that's
your
a good.
experience?
So that's really interesting. Okay, so that's a good question. The other version of this question is, would I do it again? Right, which I think is not as much of a helpful question because it makes you think about what if you hadn't made the decisions you had, and I can't actually go back and undo it. What I would have done differently is the number one thing I think I would have done, which, and I don't even know how I would have done it, but looking back now, I can see, and this actually, boy, this is a really not a very calm answer. I'm sort of circling into the answer. This relates to why I want to be here to help people in this role, right? It's such a high stress situation because you don't know how it's going to unfold. There's a lot of societal pressure that it's hard, that this percentage of people don't make it, that, step parents are evil, all of these things. And so if I could go back and do it again, I would reassure myself, that it will work, that it can work, that it's always my choice, that all the way through I have my choice. That's the thing that made a big difference to me in learning, that I was made, if I committed and made the choice and honored that as I went, I felt a lot better. And the thing that I wish I would have known to do that would have made everything smoother is read more and know I didn't know about the developmental stages of the kids that I was a part of. I think that would have been really helpful. I would have been able to enjoy it more. And so I don't know, like, I think that some people come to this experience. I think that that's why people who come to it with an experience as clinicians or teachers, sometimes they may have a slightly different experience than the one I had, because that was not my background, right? My only experience with kids was having been one, which shockingly is not a good training for being an adult taking care of people. You think it should be, right? You really think it should be. But as we all learn as adults, we don't actually know how to do this. And that's one of those shoulds, like, oh, I should know how to be a parent. And then you very quickly learn that nobody knows. And unless you have people around you to show, then we all have to learn to ask the questions. A friend of mine has a new baby and she has just figured out that she can ask me questions. So I get these questions but it's true. Like, she's like, oh my gosh, the diaper rash. And I'm like, yes, here's the secret formula that nobody tells you. Why don't they say yes? But you have to build that team and know that you don't know. And in a blended family, because it happens quickly, that's the piece that if I could wave a magic wand and know that's the thing I would do.
Yes, that's really, like, I agree with you 100% there too, because even me, like, before becoming a mom, like, I also didn't have any experience at all with children. Like I don't have children in my family. Like I didn't, so it was a learning experience for me. And so, yeah, like just remembering that the other person, right? The other
Yes.
person in the relationship may not also have experience with children, or they might not know.
Oh yeah.
So, yeah,
Yeah,
for
no,
sure.
I had somebody come like, so sometimes there can be, if you don't have kids, right?
Mhm.
Think about all the things you thought you'd do before you had kids, all the judgments you made of people who had kids before you have kids, right? That's so as stepmoms, if we come in child free, or the other person who doesn't have kids, they probably have all of those, right? You know,
Mhm.
I'm never going to put the kid in my bed with me. They're always going to be dressed and look, they're never, they're going to be perfect. They're always going to be polite, all the things, right? All the things they're going to do. This last week, I had somebody who was being very critical of the biological parent because the kid was coming over, toddler coming over with like dirt and, dirty feet and, was messy. Right. And so it was her perception that this was a sign of not enough care. And we went through it, because the other thing is that it can just be a busy kid. Like, she trusts you to bring him over in the middle of play, right? So this is the sign of having been outside, or having been allowed to explore. And I think that once you have kids, a lot of us are less likely to quickly judge what we see until we know a little bit more about what's going on, right? So, like, before I had kids, if I saw somebody with a child in the grocery store or in Target having a tantrum, my thoughts about that were completely different
Mhm.
than to after I lived that, as a stepmom and a mom, because before you have kids, you just kind of think like, oh, there's an option where you don't have to take them. And then you like end up with these little people in your life like, we really need milk. And you kids are all here. And the only way for me to do this is to drag all of you into this store right now, which is going to be tons of fun.
Yes, right. Yeah. You said all your kids are grown now,
Two
adults
of the
or
four, two of the four are
oh, okay.
grown adults and two are teenagers. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
What are you most excited for in your practice? Is there anything that you're most excited about right now?
In my coaching business,
Mhm.
I am very excited to be a voice of that it can be nice, right? I think that in the parenting space, there's a lot of training and information and support for traditional, which is not a great word for it, but a family with two parents that are never been married before. So like first marriage, two kids that don't have any special circumstances, that don't have any challenges, right? And anybody who falls outside of that extremely narrow and uncommon construction feels marginalized and a lack of support. And I think that that's very strange, because mathematically, families that don't match that are the majority, right? We know that 50% of the families are getting divorced. We know that younger families, I'm 48 as we record this. So, but younger parents are not even getting married as often, right? So like the divorce statistics are changing, but they're there. And then people are getting, anyway, there's this whole wave, there's this tsunami of like negative stuff for people who are divorced. There's a lot of judgment, remarriage, step parents, blended families. There's like this whole tidal wave of not really supportive assistance. And when we look for support, if we are looking in that, we are directed to wonderful, wonderful people. All of the people I'm going to mention are critical and talented, and needed, but they are lawyers and judges and social workers and therapists and doctors, right? Very, very, very needed, all of them. But for the people who are not in a position where they need a diagnosis, but they are struggling, right? Or they don't need a lawyer, they just need support and techniques, right, to help with communication and strategies to feel better in their family. I am really excited to stand up and say, I will help you
Mhm.
be enjoy your life in your blended family. We only get this one life. Like, why not put the effort in if we can to really be happy and
Yes.
feel loved.
Yeah, that is true. I mean, I feel like everyone needs support, and
Yes.
so having someone there in your corner to kind of offer guidance, and then especially like somebody like you that has a lot of it, your
Right.
experience and stuff, like it has been very nice, like just talking to you about this subject. And
Thank
I
you.
love your
No,
blog.
I'm a big fan of that too. I'm really, no, I remember like, so I didn't have, I would have taken advice. I would have taken advice from a homeless person on the street at various points. Like there were times where it was really hard and I didn't know where to turn. And I worked with
Mhm.
therapists and I worked with parent educators and I worked with, there were times where I would have taken any advice that I could get. I read so at the beginning of my step parent journey, I was given the book The Explosive Child, which was very helpful. And I was working with my therapist on detaching, right? So detachment or disengagement maybe. And I remember sitting in the office and I was like, you keep using this word. And I was like, but I need you to explain this. What do I need to do here? Like, I don't know what this means. Like, please tell me what to do.
I know.
And this wonderful person was he's like, all right, this is what this means. And I was just so thankful to have somebody, but in all fairness, that is something a therapist can do, but is not necessarily what a therapist's specialty is, right? So
Mhm.
depending on what they do. And it can be really hard to find people who are going to do this. And when there's stigma, a lot of times it's very interesting. Will begin to relax with me. One of the first things I do is just learn about the family.
Mhm.
And when people just get a chance to tell me about the family and all the connections of people they do, and without any judgment and without any, feeling of something is wrong about the marriages and the divorces, just that one little piece sometimes is really helpful to people.
Yeah. Yes, it is. If there was one takeaway that people could take from today's podcast on blended families and all the stuff we've been talking about, what do you think, or what would you like that to be?
Ooh, that's a good question. One takeaway. We've talked a lot
I know.
about what I would say is being open to the other person's experience. So, and that's a complicated thing to do, which as a clinician. But when we feel ourselves getting reacting and getting overwhelmed by a situation, which I like to describe as sort of that forest for the trees experience, like you're in the moment, like it feels like everything is happening right now, and you've got a lot of things about it. It is a really, really powerful thing to have the awareness that that's happening, right? And then to take a second and observe and try and reflect on what the experience is for the other person. And if you can't guess, right, if it's not totally obvious what the other person is happening, like with a 5-year-old having a tantrum, 5-year-olds have a tantrum over things that don't make sense to adults, so you're never going to actually know, but to allow them to have that whatever's going on and maybe to ask, right, hey, can you tell me a little bit more about how you're feeling right now? Because that makes a big difference, right? We know what we're feeling and we're putting that out there, but there's the other side of it. And so I think that is I think that's something that we skip, not just in blended families, but in every family. Like when we talk to our kids, when we talk to our partners, our lovers, our exes, all of those things, it's a hard thing to do, but it makes a really fast difference in how the conflict goes.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Always remembering about the other person. And
It's
yeah,
not easy.
I know.
I don't want to, I don't want to
Yes.
pretend that that's an
It
easy thing
takes
to do.
it
I
takes
don't
a
want to
lot of
pretend.
practice.
And even if you know how to do it, a lot of times what that really looks like is coming back after and being like, hey, I was super emotional and
Mhm.
I probably didn't listen to what you had to say. Maybe I yelled a little bit, and then walking it back. Like, so I don't want to give the perception that I am somebody who can do this in real time. Cause I don't think that, I think
Mhm.
that even if you have all of the skills, when stuff is going on, it's hard. I don't know. What do you think?
I agree. And that's what I tell a lot of like my listeners and readers, because I have a blog too, is that, habits are hard to break. And so
Yeah.
it takes a lot of practice, like even with simple things like just breathing, like
Yes.
mindful breathing. And so just any little thing, any change like takes a while kind of do. And so I tell people it takes practice. Like you have to do it more than once. Like don't just give up, you know. So yeah, it takes practice. It may
It
seem
does.
easy, right? Like, oh, take the other person into consideration, but it
It's
takes
easy to
it
say.
takes
It's
practice.
not
Yeah.
easy to do. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so tell people where they could find you
Oh, you
and
bet.
yeah.
Yep. All right. So my name is Amy Stone. And the name of my business is Amy Says So, which is a play on the old parental slogan, because I say so, right? The thing that parents, I guess, used to yell. So Amy Says So is my website, amysaysso.com. And that's where you can find me. And I'm on Instagram at Amy Says So _ coaching. That's where you'll find me on social media. But if you go to the website, I've got some free things you can try out, and the wonderful articles that
Yes.
I'm so happy to know that people are reading. So I'd love to have you come and visit, and I'd love to meet all the listeners. I hope I can help.
Thank you so much. Yes, everyone go read her blogs. They're so good. Thank you so much for joining me on this conversation. Like I said, like I really enjoyed it. It was very informative and I loved hearing your stories and then just also sharing. And I hope it was helpful to anyone listening. And thank you so much, Amy.
Thank you very much. It's been great fun.
Thank you for watching this video. Remember to hit the like and subscribe button for more mental health videos and tips. And don't forget to visit my website down below.